It is 10 a.m. Friday on the 11th of January in Exmouth, Australia, and this is the latest on Tropical Cyclone Nurel from 28storms.com. The first graphic is the updated information from the U.S. Joint Typhoon Warning Center. Maximum sustained 1-minute average winds are now 85 knots. They are still forecasting more in the way of intensification, and as the storm makes its closest approach to the peninsula as we go into Saturday night into Sunday morning, it still looks as though those maximum sustained winds are still forecast to be near 115 knots sustained based on their 1-minute average, so they're forecasting more in the way of intensification as the storm makes its closest approach to Western Australia. Also, the outer radius of winds here denotes the 1-minute sustained winds in excess of 35 knots, so even if the storm stays offshore, conditions are still going to deteriorate fairly significantly here right along those coastal communities. We do have some good news to report this morning. First off, this was the second most recent forecast track from the Bureau of Meteorology, and as we fast forward and look at the most recent track that has come out within the last hour, you can see the extended range forecast, although it's now forecasting a severe Category 4 by 8 a.m. on the 13th. It is a little bit more offshore and to the west of Exmouth than it was in the prior forecast track, so hopefully this is a trend that will continue. This would help to lessen the significant winds right along the coastline, and it would also help to mitigate some of the high storm surge values that we were fearing. Nonetheless, we still have cyclone watches and warnings in effect for much of the coastline, and it is important for all residents and interests in that region to continue to follow the latest tropical cyclone advice from the Bureau of Meteorology. As we scroll through the most recent update, they are still talking about thunderstorm activity beginning to increase around the Pilbara coast later today with isolated heavy rainfall and squalls possible, and toward the bottom they are still warning about potential tides increasing with those water levels rising near the coastline, and they say that a very dangerous storm tide is possible Saturday night if the center of the cyclone passes closer to the coast. However, as we just looked at, the track has shifted a little bit, so they say at the very end it is now unlikely to occur. We also have some fairly good news from some of the more recent model guidance that has become available within the last couple of hours. Some of these model solutions were much closer to the coastline 24 hours ago. And one thing that we should also point out is that the Joint Typhoon Warning Center track that we looked at earlier in the video is shaded in the black line on this graphic, and some of the three most recent models that updated are all to the west of that track. So the JTWC is likely going to also shift their forecast to the west to compensate with the latest model shift. The JTWC may also want to slowly scale down their intensity forecast. As you can see, the JTWC is now one of the more aggressive solutions, and several of the models are now backing off on a peak intensity in excess of what we're seeing now. In fact, they are now showing the storm leveling off a little bit and then quickly weakening as it moves more toward the south into cooler waters. All along, the JTWC has been anticipating this favorable upper-level ridge to locate directly over the storm, but that has so far still failed to happen. Therefore, there is still some easterly wind shear on the eastern semicircle of the tropical cyclone, and that is why the storm isn't any stronger than what it currently is. Although it's safe to say this is certainly still a very dangerous cyclone, of course it's still being rated as a severe Category 4 on the Australian scale. Also, as the storm continues to move more toward the south, not only will it begin to encounter cooler water temperatures, but also much stronger westerly wind shear coming in from troughs out of the southern Indian Ocean. The main component that has been steering Cyclone Nurel has been this powerful mid-level steering ridge over central Australia, and this ridge has been just strong enough over western Australia to keep the storm from moving due south. Instead, it's moving more toward the southwest, and hopefully this will continue. That will guarantee that the inner core of the storm, which is the region where the strongest winds are located, will stay off the coast. As we turn to the regional water vapor animation, you can see Cyclone Nurel continuing to the north of Exmouth, Australia, and the overall structure of the cyclone continues to improve. So although I think that the JTWC intensity forecast may be slightly overdone, I still anticipate more in the way of strengthening, because overall the shear pattern is still adequate enough for at least some more steady intensification. We see that the outflow, which is helping to ventilate the cyclone, is becoming better here. You can see that both the equatorward and poleward outflow channels are improving here, so that is a good sign that the storm is ready for more steady intensification. There was some concern about dry air because, as you may have heard from other sources, including our 28 Storms Facebook page, there have been some rather significant dust storms, especially near the Onslow region, and sometimes that dry air can help filter into the inner core of a tropical cyclone and induce some weakening. However, with more and more convection developing near the inner core, that dry air is probably struggling to make it into the center of Cyclone Nurel, and with more convection developing over time, that is going to help mitigate any dry air problems. Also, the latest precipitable water animation shows plenty of moisture for this cyclone to work with, so this is just more reassurance that dry air is not going to limit the amount of strengthening that we will likely see over the next 24 to 48 hours. Interests in Exmouth are still advised to keep a very close watch on Cyclone Nurel, as it will be moving in here, but there is still encouraging news, as we saw with the model guidance and some of the latest projections from the JTWC and Bureau of Meteorology. Also, as we return to the daylight hours here, as we go into the day on Friday, we begin to have more views of the visible satellite imagery, and you can clearly make out the center of the cyclone continuing to slide more toward the south-southwest or southwest. And as we turn on the latitude and longitude, you can see that the cyclone is at just about the same longitude as Exmouth now, and that is certainly a good sign, because if it continues to slide more toward the southwest for just a little bit longer, that will help to imply that the storm will miss to the west. The latest ECMWF model forecast, valid as of 12Z on the 11th of January, shows the cyclone continuing to move southwest along the western periphery of this powerful mid-level steering ridge that has shifted a little bit toward the east, but still not quite enough to lure the cyclone inland. And as we go into 48 and 72 hours, the ridge starts to make a comeback, keeping the storm off the coastline, and then as it moves into cooler waters by 96 hours, it starts to fall apart quite substantially, and then things look rather quiet around the Australian continent by day 5, but we may still be entering an active period as we go into day 7 and day 8. The European is strengthening in the monsoon trough north of WA and the top end once again, so this entire region will have to be watched for additional cyclogenesis over the next 9 to 10 days. As always, please continue to follow us at 28storms.com/cyclone, and our brief updates are very frequent throughout Twitter and Facebook. This is facebook.com/28storms. We post a lot of weather information for not only Australia but regions all across the globe, but you can see that we do have a lot of cyclone content mixed in, so you may want to follow us on not only the website but also Facebook and Twitter. Also, if you really like what you see here at 28 Storms, there are a few things that our members can do to help the cause. You can first and foremost share all the activity that you see on our social accounts. Spreading the word really helps us more than you can ever imagine. And also, if you really find our information useful, you can also add to it by sending us any weather information, news, pics, or video if we happen to miss it, as long as you can do so safely. If, for example, you're out there in Western Australia and you are feeling some of the effects of Cyclone Nurel. And finally, if you really think that the 28 Storms content has been very beneficial to you in one way or another, you can always donate to us, as we are a grassroots foundation, and we can always use the funds needed to keep this thing going. So thanks again, and have a good one out there.